Customers were even attempting to place orders before I'd officially been able to launch the store. My eyes were locked on a stack of old computers being piled up. Brand new phones for sale from shops that weren't yet offering delivery in the early 2000s. And then selling them with next day delivery has been permanently suspended. I found myself in court against a multi-billion-pound bank. I drive around every bin housing in blocks of flats and building sites in the area, collecting the scrap metal, heating our house in the winter by burning pallet wood. It wasn't long before we were able to start acquiring our first rental properties. Imagine you're flying in a plane, happily cruising along with all the other passengers. Suddenly, you wake up and realize that the plane isn't taking you anywhere remotely near where you want to go. An urge strikes you, and you decide to jump out before it is too late. There's no room to assemble your parachute in the plane, so your only option is to assemble it on the way down. That's a bit like the 18% of the population who try starting their own business. The good news, 35% of those make it before plummeting to the ground. The bad news? Well, let's discuss today how not to be part of the group who do not. The truth is, we are only really shown the highlights of most people's lives on social media. We don't really know their true background when they flaunt their Lamborghini and possibly rented film set. The reality is this: building a business takes resilience. Working from freezing cold storage units at 3 a.m, meanwhile being answerable to thousands of customers, simply to get your business off the ground, isn't for the faint-hearted. But if you keep your eyes firmly fixed on your vision, you can pull the parachute, avoid hitting the ground, and possibly even enjoy the scenery on the way down. So you can either sit back and stay cruising without a destination, or if you're ready, you can take the plunge today and learn from the lessons that I discovered from the highs, as well as how I overcame the struggles of building from nothing to millions of pounds worth of sales in my 20s. At a time where the system seems at its most broken, where the average house price in London is 18 times the average salary in the United Kingdom, it has never been more important to determine your personal strategy for building wealth. Because let me tell you this: no one else is going to do it for you. Let me start off by saying that my parents are my heroes. My dad became a very respected headmaster. He was even invited to Downing Street to meet with British Prime Ministers. And he's had a positive impact on the lives of thousands. His story, however, certainly didn't begin there. He never knew his biological father, an American soldier who was killed in the war. My parents raised my oldest siblings in one of the toughest local authority housing estates, with, would you believe it, a single communal basin shared with their neighbours. He worked his way to the top with the support of my mother, who is without doubt one of the most supportive, nurturing and encouraging humans. Their relentless drive to escape this living situation instilled values that were unusual, values that in one way or another had been passed down to each of their 5 children. While growing up, part of that meant practicing their most frugal habits. Being dropped off to school in a £75 car that we would regularly have to bump start, and taking my cycling proficiency on a bike pulled out of a skip. They could have easily bought a newer car, but they escaped the very common need to do things for the sake of impressing others. They were more interested in building their family's future than looking rich. These were all individual, critical lessons on fixing a bike and fixing a car. And if you've seen the Royal Naval advert, you'll know where these things can lead. They're lessons on being resourceful, which is imperative for running a lean business. This brings me on to lesson 1. I understand that it's been a privilege to have such a fortunate upbringing. But if you want to succeed, you need to find mentors and guidance from someone who's already climbed the mountain, and learn everything you can from them. Oh, and if people are making fun of your old car and you don't even own a single asset, it's time for you to have a rethink. Not many people know that due to ill health, I missed over 2 years of primary school. It will come at no surprise to you then that I found myself in all the bottom sets in year 7. Time went by, and it wasn't long before I found that dreaded, scrunched up letter I'd stashed away under my bed. It was a reminder. The end of school exams started the following year. A moment I vividly remember to this day. Oh dear, I was coming to the end of my education and I was failing. So deep down, I knew something had to change. Something clicked on that day. I stayed home, bought the textbooks, and completed every single practice paper over and over again. It's an understatement when I say a lot of my teachers were shocked on results day when I earned a place in the 6th form at the top boys' grammar school in the country. Which brings me to lesson 2. If you're at the bottom, you don't need to settle. Make this the wake-up call. It seems to be popular online for people to say education is not important. But I can tell you, education leads to a work ethic, which is everything. As a teenager, I'd spend my spare time calculating how much I'd need to save for a deposit for my first house. The search for items to resell for a profit began with a goal. I think everyone remembers their first sale. For me, I still feel the buzz of it like it was yesterday. A Sony hi-fi stacking system bought on my parents' eBay account. £5.15 is how much I won that auction for. I split it down to individual components and sold them separately for hundreds of pounds within weeks. A story that landed me in the local newspaper at the time. That moment planted a seed, one that soon grew into buying and selling my friends' phones and selling pretty much anything I could get my hands on. So lesson 3, always have a clear goal. Someone once said, a ship without a course will drift aimlessly no matter how strong the winds. Know exactly where you're heading or you'll never arrive. Having noticed the particularly strong demand for mobiles, I started to advertise new phones from shops that weren't yet offering delivery in the early 2000s, and then selling them with next day delivery on websites like eBay or Amazon, often able to make £20 or even £30 on a sale. I'll never forget the looks from the staff at Carphone Warehouse, who probably wondered why a particularly young looking child kept buying 5 or 6 phones at a time. I'd make the profit on the sale, but I wouldn't have to buy it in advance. I just needed to make sure items were easily available elsewhere and I didn't let anyone down. It suddenly dawned on me that you could list millions of pounds worth of items in this way. Lesson 4, when you find something that works, double down and keep going. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. This experience of buying and selling was all leading to a critical moment. There I was, sitting in the school classroom. My eyes were locked on a stack of old computers being piled up in the corridor outside. Something about those discarded machines stirred something inside me that day. Watching them being stacked up one by one, my heart was racing. That pile of scrap PCs was going to set me on a path that would lead to turning down a place at university to chase a vision. I was gradually beginning to understand the value hidden in electronics. I managed to pluck up the courage to find the headmaster and present the least experienced sales pitch. This is where I discovered that schools were actually paying to get rid of their old tech. I offered in that moment to take them for free rather than the school having to pay. I was told I needed an environment agency license, yet seeing my enthusiasm, I was given the opportunity to figure that part out. What started as an eager inquiry put me on the path to recycling thousands of computers for schools and businesses. It all started with a decision not to ignore an opportunity where others just saw rubbish. That's lesson 5. The path to success often starts by seeing what others ignore. Opportunity doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's quietly waiting for someone just to notice. School had soon ended. That left me standing in my parents' spare bedroom, which they kindly allowed me to fill with a mountain of old PCs. I now had my work cut out, and this left me with a pretty simple task: refurb and sell these PCs and simply find a way to get more. And this meant I now also needed to raise the funds to properly start this business. And I'm proud to say that at age 19, I was literally what some people might call a bin raider. I drive around every bin housing in blocks of flats and building sites in the area, collecting the scrap metal and take it to the local scrap metal yard in exchange for a very small payment. A bit different to the economics degree I just turned down. Then, based on the advice of my brother-in-law, I started to make a plan. This was to call over 200 businesses a day and get more customers. This even included playing a soundtrack of an office in the background to make it sound like I was calling from a call center. I'd ask if their business had old computers or tech they would want to dispose of or possibly even sell. Before long, my inventory outgrew the space of my parents' spare bedroom, and by age 19, I stood in the middle of a 2,000 square foot storage facility, surrounded by thousands of computers, convinced I had it all figured out. Out of nowhere, I woke up to my first major hurdle. When I say hurdle, what I really mean is complete nightmare. All in the form of what just seemed like a casual email. The kind that starts off almost trivial, but then slowly starts stabbing you in the gut. It read something a little like this. There's been an update in the status of your account. Oh right. And your access to selling on our platform has been permanently suspended. So just like that, with no warning, and the outlet I solely relied on to keep my business alive had been destroyed in a split second. I remember standing there, staring at all the inventory. My entire business was suddenly hanging by a thread. Was it all a big mistake? Should I forget everything and just rock up to the university I'd turned down? Having failed in my business, sales came to a screeching halt, almost like someone had flipped a switch. This would be make or break. And that is lesson 6. Never have all your eggs in one basket. Diversify your revenue streams. Lesson 7. It's almost impossible to fail if you constantly negotiate to ensure your costs do not wipe you out in a storm. That crisis could have ended everything, or it would be the catalyst to something far greater. I spent the next 48 hours straight crafting my first online store. I built something I hadn't even ever considered possible. My first e-commerce store became the foundation of my entire future. I had no choice but to adapt and to forge an alternative path. This is lesson 8. Even in the darkest days of rejection, failure, and even cancellation, you need to take a step back, reassess, and act strategically, because you can turn it around and come back stronger. Being one of the first to enter the online refurb Mac market, the phone was constantly off the hook. Customers were even attempting to place orders before I'd officially been able to launch the store or even configure the payment gateway to take payment. Nearly every waking hour was spent either on the phone, fulfilling orders, or replying to emails. The competition at the time was small. I managed to somehow build that website to appear organically at the top of Google, sometimes above Apple's own refurbished Mac store. The first year of the new venture brought some of the most notable days, and as a mere teenager, I found myself in court against a multi-billion-pound bank that left me no option but to pursue them through our legal system. The case was settled in my favour, and I was reimbursed for the thousands that were stolen from me. And to me, this was a matter of principle. And that's where lesson 9 was etched into my mind permanently. No matter how intimidating something might seem, use that fear to empower you. Prepare and fight for what is rightfully yours. You can either spend your life afraid of the unknown, or you can turn that fear into the biggest motivator. Although I was immersed in the world of selling electronics, I had always been a firm believer in building financial security and wealth rather than an income. To me, that was going to be in the form of property. While of course asset values aren't guaranteed, owning them appeared to me to be the only real way to protect wealth from being eroded by inflation. Finding a renovation project became my goal, and soon enough, I found an idyllic house with its fully overgrown gardens. But despite its lack of any central heating or even a bathroom, this property was way beyond my reach when I was 24. It was up for $850,000. Yet among all the properties, despite the unaffordable price tag, I decided to print that particular property's details out and stick it above my workbench. Nearly a year passed. I noticed it had come back on the market for over £100,000 less and for a quick sale. I decided to attempt to arrange a viewing, but the agents wouldn't even let me in due to the amount of interest. But just in case, I left a note on the front door. Still, I heard nothing. A few days had passed, and along the corridor came the manager of the building. He spotted the details of the property I pinned up on my wall. It turns out he'd been in that very house the week prior. The guy handling the sale was storing the contents of the house in the building. I didn't think much of it at the time until a few days later. He came running out of his office to find me and introduced me to the guy handling the sale. I found myself face to face with this man. As we walked through the building, he abruptly stopped. He stopped at the storage unit right next to mine. I remember thinking, that's a bit strange. And that's when it hit us both. The entire contents of the house I dreamt of owning were being stored just on the other side of the wall where I'd pinned up that original listing all that time ago. Just 7 weeks later, I held the keys to the project property, which I'd secured for nearly 20% less than what it was originally listed for, all because of a chance connection. It took nearly everything I had scraped together to buy. So it's particularly fortunate that I decided to cut all my costs, drive a £242 spares and repairs car, or that opportunity would have simply passed me by. My wife and I were even able to host our wedding here. I'm often asked why I'd spend time buying and renovating property if I could just focus on selling more electronics on my website. Okay, that's a fair question, but honestly, I think those questions often come from people who must not have witnessed what I've seen over the years. And that's property and assets steadily doubling in value and then doubling again for generations. This isn't a new trend. And technically, I've been proven to be right. My first property purchase was nerve-wracking. Everyone was talking about a crash at the time. And yet, here we are, after a global it's worth over £500,000 more than I paid for it just a few years later. Perhaps it'll end now, but if you ask your grandparents what they paid for their home, you'll get a sense of how long this pattern has been in motion. This trend cannot be ignored. Building wealth would take more than buying one property. We decided to drastically cut our expenses, even heating our house in the winter by burning pallet wood, and to take in a lodger to cover our bills. So we were essentially living for free. While some people would not even consider having a lodger, it's a great way to earn £7,500 a year tax-free. But it's best to do this earlier. I can tell you firsthand that your tolerance levels to a random stranger stinking out your house with gone-off fish decreases with age. It wasn't long before we were able to start acquiring our first rental properties. And this is lesson 10. Do not get complacent. Do not spend your profits. Invest them in assets, as this will provide you with wealth and financial security. We've since been blessed with our first incredible son. Your first child is truly when your perspectives on business and building wealth changes. When you have people who are truly reliant on your provision, your sense of risk changes. And this is why it is so critical to start building your wealth early. The birth of your first child is the moment that the game I'd been playing of buying and selling and building a business became a duty. The responsibilities of life became real. I used to happily skip meals purely to save money and for enjoyment, often spend time imagining what business I'd create if I had nothing. That's why I've launched this wealth channel, so I can enjoy helping others to build their business and their personal wealth. And that's lesson 11. There is way more to life than work and business. Investing in family and helping others is the greatest joy available to us on earth. You can't always predict the opportunities that will come your way, but your core foundations need to be ready to receive them when they arise. Thanks for watching. My name's Charles Brand of Charlie's Wealth Academy. If there's one thing that you do today, let it be subscribing to our channel. Here, you can educate yourself from those who have learnt the hard way so you don't have to. They really don't teach a lot of this stuff in business school, and I can tell you that firsthand, having achieved literally the top grade, grade A, business A level, and none of this stuff was in the exams or in the textbook. So, if you've got a personal goal, hit the like button now, and perhaps write your goal in the comments to mark the defining moment of your journey.